NTV.
You're watching Morning at NTV. I'm Arnold Sagawa, 26 minutes to 8 a.m. If you're familiar with the UN Paris principles, I think, I dropped out of law school. Once upon a time I was a lawyer. You would know a thing or two about criminalizing and not actually criminalizing petty offenses. To help us with this very erudite conversation is to my left, Mrs. Ruth Sachindi, Director Monitoring Uganda Human Rights Commission. Miss Ruth, is that right?
Yeah, Miss Ruth Sachindi. Yeah.
Miss Ruth. And to my extreme left, Dr. Adrian Juko, who is the ED Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum. Lady, gentlemen, thanks for making time to speak to us. Paris Protocols, Paris Principles. So which one is it?
Paris Principles.
Paris Principles. I knew I shouldn't have dropped out of law school. The locus classicus and the Latin just confused me a bit. That's when I dropped the ball. Just let's start with this whole idea of petty crimes. Mm-hmm. What qualifies for a petty crime in Africa? I think let me start with you, Adrian.
Yeah, basically, the way it sounds, petty offenses. These are small offenses, basically that are punishable with a small fine or imprisonment of not more than a year. Really small little things. In Uganda, what's most commonly known is being idle and disorderly, being rogue and vagabond. And these involve things like being found wandering on the street without really, without any lawful purpose,
with reckless abandon.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, collecting alms on the street is part of the petty offenses. And then there are other much smaller little provisions under KCC ordinances and other things. So small things, you get arrested without any real proof of what happened. So if you're found wandering with an immoral purpose, what does that mean? Who is a person who is a wanderer for immoral purposes? Who is a person who is found without a suspected thief, right? Mm-hmm. Suspected thief. Who is a suspected thief?
But what happened to innocent until proven guilty? If you're saying things like suspected thief, yeah, it sounds like there's already a prejudice of sorts. Ruth, maybe you could just touch that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to Adrian and what he's saying. Petty offenses date back from our colonial days or our colonial masters. And they brought these petty offenses to be able to manage the African colonized or enslaved persons. And so they had to get revenue out of them. They had to make sure that they work, and they wanted to manage them. Now, like Adrian has said, it was all about idle and disorderly. These offenses cannot easily be interpreted in the context of criminal law. So that if you're looking at the cause of action, and you're like, yes, I was loitering, so just taking a walk around a neighborhood, you commit an offense. Offenses such as collecting alms, that is begging. Mm. So you're criminalizing poverty, you're criminalizing unemployment, you are not dealing with the root causes of why this person is begging. Showing a wound or a disability, you're criminalizing disability. But that is idle and disorderly, that is rogue and vagabond. When you look at the Penal Code, Article 60, on common nuisance, what is common nuisance? Making noise, obstructing persons, and how do I know I'm obstructing you if I just stand by your gate? So some of these laws cannot fit within the definition of what a crime is, okay? Mm. Who have I wronged? So we need to go back and get some of these laws off our statute books. And we have been calling on this, the African Commission has been calling on this for all countries to consider. And as a country as Uganda, we have to look at how do we get these exploitative laws and inhuman laws that violate the dignity of persons of our statute books.
I love that you bring in the African Union, because I love the idea of the African Union. But when it comes to the Yamoussoukro, when it comes to the Malabo Declaration, when it comes to some of these declarations, they just write them, they sign them, a few guys ratify them, then they just collect dust up somewhere in some cupboard. And still, decriminalization, I see this is still one of the big anchors that the African Union has actually put out there, African Union Commission on Human and People's Rights. But give me a sense of how to move this from theory and fast track it towards reform as fast as possible, constitution-wise. Adrian, maybe you could touch that too, Ruth.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now, basically speaking about it. She's from the Uganda Human Rights Commission, I'm from Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum, civil society, government entities, state agencies. All of us have to work together to make sure that this becomes a reality. I don't agree with you so much when you say these are mostly documents that are gathering dust somewhere on the shelf. That's not actually true. International law works quite interestingly.
No, I meant that in a broader context. I think I'm very oblivious to the law side of the African Union, but when it comes to open air, Yamoussoukro was signed close to 2000, free open air skies for the whole of the continent. You wouldn't have to be paying as many taxes as we do right now. The Malabo Declaration, where close to 10% is invested in agriculture. All these things are great.
Don't happen.
Question is, how much do we invest in our budget-wise, fiscal-wise in agriculture? So the law side, that I'm oblivious. You could educate me.
All right. So the international law usually is not seen to be working, but actually it works in many ways. Countries respect each other. In many times, they are kind of sisters and brothers in some sort of struggle, whatever they're involved in. So they usually respect each other, and that way, whenever we make reports at the African Commission, whenever we make reports at the African Union, the countries do listen. And when they do listen, they come back. That's why when the African Commission is sitting, government officials actually are many attending the session. That means when they come back here, they know what they have committed to. When they commit, we have to make them live up to their commitments, and that's very critical. Governments will just come here and hide if you don't say anything. But if you come back here, put them at task, explain, when you committed to do this, have you done it? It's up to us, the people we elect into power, the governments that we vote into power. That's how we make our voice heard. So speaking out, engaging, calling upon the little bearers to do their job is what requires human rights to actually do work.
Ruth? Okay, clearly you agree. Yeah, you agree with everything you just said. Okay, I want maybe to just go back to the issue of petty offences. Some of the things that, Ruth, that you've mentioned, words, that there's qualifiers like a nuisance, which is really subject to opinion or interpretation. And do you get the sense that some of the enforcers of the law grasp the nuance of some of these words? And as you're touching that, maybe you could also touch on the fact, I love that you started with a bit of a history lesson from the colonizers, but I remember once I was told that common law is almost, well, it's kind of a follow-up from the Magna Carta of sorts, and it was supposed to be, you know, all-embracing and have all these good aspects to it. Just touch those two for me. Okay,
I will just start with what you said last. Just because we have a law does not make it right. Just because we had apartheid and it was in the statute books did not make it right. So, and if you look at the history of these petty offenses, they were in most common law African countries. And the provisions are very similar or the same. And the rationale or objective of these laws, if you read back of these petty offenses, was to manage communities that our colonial masters had colonized, or the countries. So we need to move away from that. Because when you look at these provisions in the law, they violate human rights. We are creating unjust cities. Because if you look at the KCCA Act, okay, there are provisions like fouling air, obstructing, I mean, laughable provisions, okay, that we shouldn't be having in our statute books. And we're saying we are criminalizing unemployment, we are criminalizing disability, we're criminalizing poverty, and what benefit do we have to have these laws on the statute books? We need to go back on what was the intent. Do they cure something in our legal framework? Okay, shouldn't we are living in an age where people are always asking for laws. Every social upheaval, everything that the state has not addressed, everything that we have not addressed as a community, we ask for laws instead of dealing with the real issue, particularly economic, social, and cultural issues. whether it is unemployment, whether it is poverty, whether it is issues of whatever it is. Let us deal with the root causes of why people are begging, of why people are hawking, of why people are on the streets, and it's poverty. And not criminalize some of the issues that we have to intervene in and remedy. So we have to look at the root causes.
Adrian.
But also, what happens when people get arrested is something we should take interest in. Because first we see people are taken off our streets. Someone walks around, wanders in your area, they are picked up, they are taken away. Someone is found walking and they are taken away. Where do they go? What happens? So I want us to link this to COVID-19 right now. So it's so easy to arrest someone, a hawker on the street. It's so easy to find someone walking and you arrest them because they feel powerless. It's not like they aren't the powerful people. I've seen many occasions as the police is enforcing COVID-19 regulations, the guys in cars just pass curfew. They just pass and continue as if there's not, even the police makes for you when you are in a car. If you're walking on the street, I've found people being arrested and being beaten by police officers as I drive past. So that's a class issue. If you're driving a car, you can't be arrested. But where are they taken? They are piled up in prison cells, in police cells that are full of other people. We are talking about COVID-19. We're talking about social distancing. We are even putting our own officers at risk. And usually when you go to police, you are usually taken to prison, and prisons are already almost full, or not, if not fully full, and they're already beyond capacity. When you spend you spend a lot of time on detention, the courts are not working at full capacity. They have not been working at full capacity. You cannot process them fast enough. You keep on bringing more people. For petty offences, you can't even prove. They stay there. I handled a case where 20 people were arrested in a house, in a house, and they were charged with doing a negligent act like to spread infection of disease. And the question is, you are staying at home, like the president said, and you are being picked up. They spent 60 days on remand without access to their lawyers. And that's unacceptable. They have added to the prison population, and that's just a group of 23. Just imagine all over the country, how many people are in prison over that. Eventually, their case was dismissed for want of, basically, the DPP withdrew charges. And this happens in so many cases, you don't even get a conviction. People have spent almost the entire time they would have spent on punishment, if they had been convicted, in prison. And what does this add to us in terms of value, in terms of cost? How much do we spend on a single person arrested under petty offences? We need to think about all these things. When they're in prison, these guys I'm talking about were actually burnt with burning pieces of wood between their thighs by prison authorities in jail. So it's not just about arresting people and taking them off the streets. There's much more in terms of human rights implications that happen when you get picked up.
That's a very tragic story. If we're to touch on best practice rather, across maybe, let's start with the continent before you fast forward it. Because I was reading up on some decriminalization of petty offences. I think California has one of the best, I think, where some petty offences could get you maybe an hour of community service, but let's not get that far. Africa-wise, what is who can we look at and we say, this is a decent start?
The most recent example is Malawi. Malawi did away with their provision on being rogue and vagabond. That is the provisions about wandering, being a suspected thief. Someone went to court. They said a hawker off the street. They went to court and actually won the case. And right now you can say there is reform taking place in terms of the police not picking up people under these particular laws. So examples like those are examples we can actually use at that point. So we're not the first to do it. Many other countries are doing it. We've already filed a case in court challenging the same provisions that were challenged in the Malawi decision. I think even court can help us go some extra mile. We've already had the president speaking out quite openly about petty offences and the fact that they should be decriminalized.
But it's interesting that you bring up Malawi because let's face it, the court ruling just the other day in Malawi took us by surprise. It was almost as fascinating as Kenya's.
Exactly.
And I have a Malawian friend. We were texting and I was cheering. I was saying, this is just give me a sense of, maybe Ruth, you could touch this. How vital is it for a court system to be at the pinnacle of functionality? I'm talking Maraga kind of stuff, eh? How critical is it for the court system to be that astute before we bring in all these aspects of the hawker? Because let's face it, some of these hawkers cannot even talk to a state attorney.
Okay, I will not go into the Maraga, but I'll say, when we are talking about the judiciary and the court system and access to justice, it's very critical in any country. That is why we talk about the organs of the state. But when we look at court makes laws. It guides the states on state policy, on the legislation that are enacted, and on the provisions or bylaws or whatever it is the state may have. So it guides the process within the legal framework. So you cannot talk about democracy and rule of law without a just court process or processes that in any country. So that is why when everything fails in any country, court should be the last resort. Court should find the remedy and the way forward for any country. And that is why we look at Malawi, but even in Uganda, we have had some very progressive, judges that have come out to interpret the law and make law, because judges make law. So that is why when we look at, now I want to drive it back to the petty offences. If we have a good judicial court, if we have a good court or good justice systems, then we know that justice shall prevail. Now, I want to take it back to Adrian, where the president came out and stopped all arrests based on idle and disorderly. Now, that was good, because when we strip the streets, now the sweeping means the random arrests, we are violating people's dignity. At one point, they even arrested a judge without knowing.
But Ruth,
now,
is this a president's prerogative?
It
because
is not.
For me, if it comes down to the president to make such announcements or to give people to give a teacher's SACCO 2 billion, it shows me that all the other systems, all the other institutions are broken or non-existent.
But it's the fountain of honor. And you can't take that away from him. It is in the Constitution, okay? So because of that, he also has that obligation to prevail over certain situations, to look at how institutions of government are operating. Because when all fails, the government, the president is the head of the executive, okay? And at the end of the day, whether you want it or not, politics rules us all. It takes the day. So that is very critical, and please never forget it. It's very important. But then back to petty offenses. When we have this legislation, one, these laws are discriminatory. For example, the way you're dressed, you cannot be arrested for idle and disorder.
Well, it depends.
You can't be arrested for loitering, okay? But just go and change that shirt and wear one that is maybe a bit torn. You'd be surprised by what would happen to you, okay? So these are discriminatory laws. They are selective in operation, and they violate your core dignity. Now, when they sweep the streets, these people end up in KCCA courts, and they end up overcrowding our prisons.
I think the only reason I wouldn't be arrested is because
you can speak English.
No, my shirt is it has no color. My shirt is white.
So what we're saying is that they're discriminatory, and oftentimes they sweep the poor. Okay, to an extent, when a judge was just having a good time, he was not in his suit, he was swept off the streets until they realized they had made the ultimate mistake. Okay, so that's why we're saying, be careful of the laws that you make and keep. They can't catch you. But even other than that, the overcrowding in prisons, the issues of dignity, I think having these laws on our statute books goes against all the human rights standards, all the human rights principles that we believe in, that we have ratified, and the ones that should be guiding any government or state.
Adrian, you could just touch on that. I think I need to start writing quotes because you mentioned something that's very interesting, Ruth. The courts make law. When you say that, do you mean that because of the precedents, if there's a ruling? Okay. Adrian.
So for me, yes, courts make law, and that's very important, but courts need to be moved to make law. There's another organ that doesn't need to be moved to make law, and that's Parliament. As it can be moved, yes, but it's their duty, it's their obligation. No one needs to bring a case before Parliament for them to actually make law. So we've seen the president has said something about it. We've seen the judiciary, at least there's a case pending for the judiciary since at least 2 years back about pet offences. Now, where is Parliament in all this? There has been talk of Parliament bringing a bill to recognize pet offences from the presidential directive. However, where has that process ended? What has Parliament done? But also, Parliament needs to be moved by us as people. We have to make demands, make Parliament do something. So for me, the missing link for now is still Parliament. If Parliament actually moves to recognize pet offences, the pet offences will be off the law books in an inkling. So they're making all sorts of laws right now. Why can't they make laws affecting pet offences? For example, we are moving towards to the elections. Already we see people being picked up, people being beaten up, and this is where we need laws that are really protective of the majority. This is the majority. This is not even minority, or the majority of the population. The majority of Ugandans are poor. As if the laws discriminate against the poor, then many of us will be affected, will be picked up under these laws. So Parliament, and as we vote in people, we should ask ourselves, what do they actually do? What do they actually do? We send them to Parliament with a mandate. Do they fulfill that mandate? And that's our prerogative as people who actually do vote.
There's also a lot of absenteeism. Last I checked, and it's almost impossible to pass anything if there's no quorum. Adrian, the last time you were here, we spoke about the issue of some offenders being pardoned by the head of the state again. I think it was 800?
800
yes.
at that time, yeah.
And you threw up your books and you said, you know, that number is just not good enough. You could just allude to that in this particular conversation. And does this issue actually stem from the fact that the system is just, it's too slow and there's such a huge backlog? Or is that just a symptom?
I don't think the system is too slow. I think the system is deliberately slow. They know what they're doing. They know what they're undertaking. When the police picks you up on the street, they know they're picking you up for the wrong reason. We talked about motivation even at that time. Why do the police actually keep on picking up people who are poor? It's because it's easy to arrest someone who is walking than someone who is in a car, like I said before. But also, there's another motivation, which is money. That if I pick you up, mostly in Uganda, to run out of a situation of where the police has picked you up, you pay something. We all know that, kitu kidogo. To let you go, you pay mutwale ebidi, some mutwalo gumu here and there. And that's very critical as a source of income for the police. That also brings it to the structural issue. Issues of corruption, issues of police warfare. How much are they actually paid? Why are they taking bribes? Or not everyone can take it, even well paid people can take bribes, but basically, if you don't pay people well, that's what will end up being done. So there's even a much bigger structural issue. What happens? But also, if you look at that prerogative of mercy, for example, when does it work? For whom does it work for? How often does it work for? We have to light a torch in all these institutions. Why do people keep on detention, on pretrial detention for that long? You know? So it's the police, it's the prisons, it's the court system. Everything is grinding very slowly. But someone important gets picked up today. We know, we have examples from the NRM campaigns. You get arrested today, you're going to get bail within less than a week. Police bond, then bail. What about for the poor who spend not 60 days? They spend forever on remand and detention. Why don't we apply it equally to everyone so that everyone has a fair chance? When I get arrested, I can benefit from the prerogative of mercy, I can get bond, I can get bail. Quite clear without paying for it.
All right, Ruth, just help me understand the issue around whether or not we actually, most Ugandans, I want to really touch on, quote unquote, the poor, which is the majority, and many of us are. Do we actually know our rights? I think that's the other place I would have started, because at the beginning you mentioned a lot of things that I didn't even know that's actually illegal. Should I say illegal? But do we actually grasp, many of us, do we grasp some of these things?
Okay. For starters, majority of Ugandans don't know their rights, even though we have tried. So, but it has improved. Now, back in the days, it was really bad. Right now, people know a lot of their entitlements. And so that is why when they're arrested, you hear so many people these days saying, I know my right. They know particular rights that they think they should know. They don't know many others. And as a commission, we have endeavored to sensitize them, but it's not good. It's not good enough. It's not as sufficient as we would want it to be. So I cannot say that all Ugandans know their rights, because even the educated ones don't know all the rights, okay? And it's incumbent upon us and the communities and everyone who can make a difference to be able to sensitize communities about, and even our own households, about rights, duties, and obligations, because rights go hand in hand with duties and obligations. But also, other than the rights, knowing the law, just the basic provisions of the law. Do you know that if I loiter around just having a walk, or if I have, I don't smell very pleasant, someone can sue me and say, you know, I'm fouling air, you know, in the community, something like that. Some of these laws, and that's why we're saying some of these laws are really laughable and they don't deserve to be on our statute books. But other than that, I think the persons in Uganda should know the basics. And I think we have tried. Whenever you sit on TV, you hear people talking about rights, human rights. Here of here, there are many NGOs that are always talking about human rights. Do we understand the rights? So people usually pick up issues of liberty, detention or arbitrary detention, and also issues of torture and freedom of expression, okay? I can speak, I can join a political party. That is what their focus is. But it's bigger than that, okay? So that is why we partner with NGOs and other key players and partners to help us sensitize communities. It is just work in progress. You can never have enough knowledge. So knowing rights is a continuous process.
But Ruth, maybe I asked the question the wrong way. Shouldn't this be two sides to the equation? Because it's one thing for me to understand a few of my rights, but then I run into an LDU who's had a very bad day and had just a tiny donut for the whole day, and he beats the living daylights out of me. This is before, of course, they went back for their human rights training. And I want to assume that they're now in tip-top shape. Shouldn't it be a dual-pronged approach? Because it's one thing, there's one radio station, it's a Luganda-speaking radio station, one of the big ones. And during the news, they have a small segment. It breaks the law for you to do this. Then they bring in a lawyer, and then he explains. Each and every day I'm listening to things. That's the first time I heard the one of breaking air, you know. I was appalled. Not that I do it a lot, but I was aghast. Shouldn't it be a dual-pronged approach? And this is actually attested by the fact that the security organs had to take back the LDUs to train them in human rights. Clearly, initially they didn't think that was actually something to worry about until they saw the clip of an LDU chasing a pregnant woman and beating her with a stick the size of a python.
Other than human rights, and I'm going to get back to that, there are moral obligations and morals and upbringing. So when we get these jobs, we get them from the same violent society where we come from. And when you see people doing mob justice, getting someone and burning them alive, and they're all watching and cheering on, you know you have a big problem on your hands. And this is what is happening in our country. We are instilling, inculcating, and encouraging the culture of violence in our societies. Now, when it comes to recruitment, we are getting persons in enforcement from the same violent community.
Who are cheering the mob justice, yeah.
Who are cheering and are condoning and accepting corruption, accepting torture, accepting all kinds of illegal activities. And we think that is right. I think right from the recruitment, we have to do a background check. And then when we try to sensitize them, then we can try to sensitize. But just the fact that you know the law and you know human rights does not make you a good law enforcement officer. Because these people, for example, police, are trained into human rights, and human rights is part of the curricula. So if that means that every police officer who comes out of training school has studied human rights, the question is why then do they continue to do some of these unspeakable acts? So just because they know human rights, just because they know the law, is not good enough. We have to ensure that they implement what they know. We have to make sure that we supervise them very closely. But also the attitude, there has to be attitude change. Okay? So it is not good enough to say, I know the law, I know human rights. There are many lawyers who break the law themselves. Okay? So I think that's my take on that.
Before I bring you in, Adrian, it's quite fascinating. I was speaking to a border guy. This is at the height of the first lockdown. And he told me that if he was stopped by an LDU, that would be a problem.
Right.
But if he was stopped by the army, the time when the army was actually, the real army was doing the rounds, the army guy would ask, this happened to him on numerous occasions. They would ask questions like, no, where are you going? But you know it's past curfew. And for me, it painted such a different picture. And I'm not trying to say this or the other about the UPDF, but, and then he would let him go. And you know, and it happened like on 3 occasions. Then he said, okay, that's the army. Yeah, he said, yes, the army. But there's a website here that touches on reforms from different countries regarding human rights and reforms vis-a-vis petty crimes and petty offences. Sierra Leone, new bailing and sentencing guidelines 2018. Uganda Human Rights Commission, you guys mentioned. You're up there in the lights, participated in the amendment of the Prisons Act. Their input was to ensure that the act is compliant with the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. That's, of course, the Mandela rules. Again, thank you, Uganda Human Rights Commission, for putting us in the lights. It's one thing to have the amendment. It's like how polythene bags were banned in Uganda over a decade ago, though they're flying left, right, and center. Just talk to me about, are the Mandela rules being implemented as per your knowledge? Let me start with you, Doctor, then I'll come to you, Ruth.
The issue of implementation, again, is critical and important. But for me, I'll take it from the perspective of political will. Why Kavera is still on the street is because we want it to be on the street. Also, maybe it may point to a bigger picture of how much control do we actually have over society as government. Does the government want to go and exercise control over society, or do they just let society do what they want to do? Because when you go to ShopRite, I guess, and many of such other high-end places, there are no Kavera. When you go to Kalere, as you walk home at night, Kavera is everywhere. Why can't we enforce that in Kalere, yet we can enforce it in ShopRite? So it's kind of a dualism. There are people to whom rules apply. There are people to whom rules don't apply. When I move up country, in these COVID-19 times, I see like the rules don't apply up country. It's like up country has no COVID whatsoever. There's a place I went to recently with my mask, and it's kind of felt a little bit embarrassing to be wearing a mask because we're the only one amongst a throng of people wearing a mask. I'm like, okay, what happened? Don't these guys listen to the messages? So for me, the issue of law enforcement, the issue of how we should apply these laws is critical. Does the government actually want to enforce these laws, or do they let it happen? For example, do they let the police arrest whoever they have to arrest because that's the way the police survives? Or is it a bigger question, like the police doesn't actually have the capacity to enforce these rules? You talked of the army, the border guys on the being arrested by the army.
Face, yeah.
Hey, the army. Did you hear what you said? The army may be professional. Does the army have to be on the streets arresting border guys? Let alone LDUs. Where's the police? The police is what's supposed to be law enforcement. The army is supposed to defend us from external attacks, not from our own, what we call our own attacks. I don't know. That's not even an attack. A border guy riding past curfew is not a serious offense. So for me, the question of who enforces the laws, and right now, is there a difference between the police and the army? Sometimes I see police, army people on police vans, people on army vans. Hey, how does it work out? And so for me, it's a question of where our priorities. How do we enforce these laws? Do we do the right thing? Do we want to do it, or do we let the police pay themselves through kitu kidogo by arresting people? It may be a political question right there. Do we actually let them do that, or do we actually enforce the laws the way they're supposed to be? Do we even want to enforce the laws? Do we want to discipline errant officers in reality? When someone does something, do they know that routinely, as soon as I beat up a civilian, I'm going to be taken to court? You know, we've sued, right now after here I'm going to court for a case where we sued the prison authorities who burnt the guys in Kitalia prison, who burnt prisoners, and the mayor of Chengera, of Chengera Town Council, who also participated in the arresting and beating of these hapless young youth, Haji Chiimba. Right now we are going to court, but we moved for private prosecution That's the civil case now. But we moved in Wakiso court and we were issued summons to come to court. We went to the police. The police told us, well, it had Chimba, and you see, prisons is not our jurisdiction. I'm like, what's your jurisdiction? If a criminal offense is committed, it has been committed. Well, the police never investigated. So we went and did a private investigation, instituted private proceedings. They issued summons for the two. The two of them didn't appear. Well, even the magistrate wasn't also there, but that's a different issue altogether. The impunity, how does court tell you to come and you don't appear? Because people know they can do something and get away with it. So for me, the question of, do we actually want to enforce? Why would the police refuse to investigate a case of torture, of banning? Why would you say we have no jurisdiction? You are the police, you know the Police Act. If a criminal offense is committed, you have to enforce. So for me, that's the question. Which kind of priorities do we enforce? What do we enforce? How do we train our police? Do we want them to do the things they ought to do? Do we discipline them when they become errant? Big questions which also go to the governance of this very country.
Well, if you could touch on that, then maybe just sum it
Yeah,
up.
for me, I'll just go to the Mandela rules.
The
Mandela rules are what we used to call the minimum standard rules for treatment of prisoners. The UHRC participated in the amendment of these rules. It's very important for persons incarcerated or deprived of their personal liberty, those are prisoners, to retain all their rights, because it's only the right to liberty that has been deprived of them, that has been taken away. They retain all the other rights. And so it's very important that our prisons comply with the Mandela rules. And we have noted that unlike police detention facilities, prisons has made a lot of progress and has really tried within the limitation of resources to make sure that inmates have sufficient diets. There's no torture. They're not. Oh, if it is limited. To make sure that they have the right to worship, their right to leisure and everything. So in many prisons facilities, there's been a tremendous improvement over the years, thanks to the Mandela rules. However, recently we've just written an advisory on places of detention. They still have a challenge when it comes to COVID-19. You saw what happened in Amuru 1 prison, having 154 cases of COVID, and yet they don't have sufficient facilities to do mass testing in prisons, which means that one case in prisons can wipe out the whole institution, and that is a big threat, because these are facilities where you can't social distance, wearing masks. Majority don't have masks yet, and the fact that there's overcrowding in places of detention, particularly prisons, then is a big threat to inmates. So the Mandela rules, we are not yet there, but at least prisons is trying on the implementation. And
the reform has been done, at least you did your part. Lady, gentlemen, thank you again for making time to speak to us. Very intense conversation. Joining me on my left, Ms. Ruth Sekindi, who is the Director monitoring Uganda Human Rights Commission, and to my extreme left, Dr. Adrian Juko, who is the Executive Director, Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum. Let's take a quick breather. I'll be back with more Morning at 10 TV after this.